Hi everyone, Wasim Parkar over here. Thank you so much for tuning in to my Australian Open vlog. Today I am actually going to preview day three of the 2018 Australian Open. But before that, I'd like to take some time to reflect on the first round. I think it's fair to say the biggest stories from the first round were on the women's side. Basically, all of them happened on the first session of day one, and that is three of the four semi-finalists at last year's US Open are out in the first round. The biggest one to fall, of course, is Venus Williams. Many considered her one of the front runners in Serena Williams' continued absence. But Venus lost in the first round in a fantastic match to 20-year-old Belinda Bencic from Switzerland. This match was filled with breathtaking stroke play. The way both the players were able to find angles of both sides was a pleasure to watch, and ultimately, Belinda Bencic's fearless approach paid off for a well deserved win. I have to say, like many others who follow tennis, we've waited a while for Bencic to have a breakthrough at a Grand Slam. She's been talked about since she entered the circuit as a 16-year-old. In fact, in 2015, she won the Rogers Cup. People thought she would kick on from there, but here she's finally made a breakthrough at a Grand Slam with this result. Let's see how far she can go. The other big casualty in that first session was Sloane Stephens, of course, the 2017 US Open champion. Sloane lost in three sets to Shuai Zheng of China despite having a match point. And shockingly now, Sloane has lost all eight matches since winning her first Grand Slam at the US Open. So clearly, she's going to have to make some adjustments, learn to live with being a Grand Slam champion, figure out what she needs to do so that she can play tennis at a consistent level. And then Coco Vandeweghe, who not only was a semi-finalist at the US Open, but was in fact also a semi-finalist at last year's Australian Open, lost in the first round to Timea Bebos, 7-6, 6-2. Coco was really ill-mannered throughout the game. She was throwing fits left, right, and center. Even went as far as to blame the lack of bananas for her defeat. Really, that's a new one I've never heard of after following tennis for so many years. So that's three out of the four US Open semifinalists out in the first round in the women's draw. Another upset was Petra Kvitova losing to Andrea Petkovic. It was a close match, 10-8 in the third set. But Petkovic has form for causing upsets like this, whereas Kvitova is still not the player that we saw before her knife attack. So maybe, all things considered, this one wasn't as much of a shock. On the men's side, you'd have to say everything went pretty smoothly for all the big guns. Not only did Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal have routine first round victories, but there were a lot of eyes on Novak Djokovic and Stan Wawrinka, who were making their returns to the circuit for the first time since July of last year, since Wimbledon of last year. And both of them came through. Djokovic, I have to say, looked fantastic against Donald Young, whereas Stan was a bit rusty against Ricardus Berankis. He lost a set but came through in four. Stan Wawrinka struggling in the first or second round of a Grand Slam isn't something he's not used to. He usually gets into his stride in the second week of a Grand Slam, so I wouldn't be worried too much for Stan either. Thomas Berdych, Alexander Zverev, all of them came through their first round matches. You'd have to say, on paper at least, it seems to me that Roger Federer's half of the draw is the tougher one. Not only is Novak Djokovic and Stan Wawrinka in that half of the draw, but also David Goffin, who beat Roger Federer at the year-end Masters in the semifinals, is in that half of the draw. So are the two young guns, Dominic Thiem and Alexander Zverev, as well as experienced quarterfinalists and semifinalists like Juan Martín del Potro and Thomas Berdych. On Rafael Nadal's side of the draw, I think at most you can say his most serious threat comes from Grigor Dimitrov, and maybe Marin Cilic, where you have some wild cards like Joe-Wilfried Tsonga and Nick Kyrgios, who's actually playing some fantastic tennis. But with Nick, the big if is, if he switches off mentally, it's game over. But he is looking very, very exciting. So that's a quick reflection on the first rounds of both the men's and women's. Yes, there were some upsets in the men's side as well. I'll quickly mention them. A lot of big servers went out. Kevin Anderson, who had such a fantastic US Open, lost in the first round. The US Open finalist lost in 5 sets to Britain's Kyle Edmund. John Isner lost in the first round to Matthew Ebden. Isner starting to lose earlier and earlier in Grand Slams. He's always been a guy who's relied on his serve more than anything else, and he's not been serving particularly well now for almost a year. So that's something he needs to work on. Milos Raonic, another player who was coming back after a injury-enforced absence. Of course, Milos has positive memories of Australia being a semi-finalist and quarter-finalist in the last 2 years, but he lost in the first round to lucky loser Lucas Latchko. From what I saw, Milos just didn't look fit, didn't look like he had the right energy, and there's just general lack of match fitness, not good decisions, so it wasn't a huge surprise to see him lose. Roberto Batista Agut, who'd actually won in Auckland, beating Juan Martin Del Potro in the finals just a day before the Australian Open started, actually lost in the first round to Fernando Verdasco, which, come to think of it, probably isn't that much of an upset considering Verdasco's pedigree at the Australian Open. 2009 semi-finalist, and then a couple of years ago actually beat Nadal in the first round. So all in all, in both the women's side and the men's side, there are plenty of big guns still left, which means the remaining 12 days of this Australian Open should serve up plenty of thrilling action. So getting into the meat of day 3, now I always find that the second round of a Grand Slam is a bit anticlimactic, considering the first round is where players are most vulnerable to the upsets, and then in the second round everyone's actually just waiting for the third round, is when seeds start playing each other, so you don't always get many tasty matchups in second rounds of Grand Slams. That being said, for day 3 I've picked 5 matches on the men's side and 5 matches on the women's side, which at least serve some interest to sort of tennis geeks like me, and maybe might interest the average fan as well. So I'll start with the men's side. The first game I want to talk about is Pablo Carreño Busta. Now, all of you remember he made a sensational run to the semifinals of the US Open last year. He's a very solid player. He takes on Gilles Simon. Now, Gilles Simon, for the longest time, was a perennial seeded player. He's always a tricky opponent to play. And it's going to be interesting to see how Carreño Busta matches up against Simon, because one thing you can rely with on Gilles Simon is that he'll always return balls back no matter how you hit them. So Pablo Carreño Busta was his US Open just a flash in the pan. It's a big test for him, and I think I would pick the Willie Simon to actually cause an upset over here. I already mentioned that Kyle Edmund beat Kevin Anderson, the US Open finalist, in the first round. He next takes on Dennis Easterman. Now, Dennis Easterman's claim to fame, of course, was last year at the Australian Open in the second round. He upset Novak Djokovic. So Edmund and Easterman go up against each other. Should be an interesting battle. I do think Edmund is the better all-round player, and he would be a contender for me to make a deep run sort of into the round of 16, maybe even a surprise quarterfinal. So that's certainly a match to keep an eye on. Will Easterman be able to take out Edmund? I'm going to go with Edmund in 4. Rafael Nadal is playing Leonardo Maia. Now, Nadal is a huge favorite over here, but I flagged this match because these both played against each other in the third round of the US Open, and actually Maia had won the first set, and in the second set he was up a break and Nadal had to dig deep. Now, reflecting on his successful US Open, Nadal has actually mentioned that it was at that match against Leonardo Maia that he realized that he had to dig in and play his best tennis to win the Grand Slam, and overcoming that deficit actually gave Nadal that belief to win the US Open. So I'm expecting another entertaining match. Nadal is the clear favorite. I don't think anyone can deny that. But Maia is a shot maker. He's a lot of fun to watch, and I think this match will be a really good one. Another US Open rematch is Denis Shapovalov, the young Canadian who's got so many excited in Canada and even in the US, taking on Jo-Wilfried Tsonga. Now, Tsonga loves the Australian Open. It's the only Grand Slam where he's actually made the finals. He's made the semifinals twice. He's always played well in Australia. The courts are playing fast, so he'll enjoy playing over there. But Shapovalov beat Jo-Wilfried Tsonga at the US Open in straight sets, and this is a match between two shot makers who are just going to go for it. I can't wait for this one. I'm actually going to go with Tsonga winning this one just because of his greater experience and because he loves playing in Australia. But I wouldn't be surprised if this match went either way and possibly even went the distance. 5 sets. The last match on the men's side, which is interesting to me, is Andrei Rublev, who, of course, made the US Open quarterfinals and only a few weeks before the Australian Open made the finals at Doha, taking on Marcos Baghdatis, former finalist at the Australian Open as well. So, of course, Rublev is one for the future, whereas Baghdatis, his career may be winding down. But Baghdatis still has a lot of fan support in Australia. The fans love him. It's going to be an interesting match. Rublev, interestingly, also had a very tough first round match where he beat David Ferrer, who's never an easy opponent to beat, in 4 sets. So I would back Rublev because he's got the greater power, he's got the more offensive game, but expect Baghdatis to entertain the crowd and play some entertaining shots as well. I'd say Rublev in 4. So those are my 5 picks on the men's side for day 3. 5 games that are interesting to me on the women's side. Not many games that actually stand out, but these are nonetheless a little interesting. A game between Wimbledon semifinals current semifinalists, current and past. Magdalena Rybarikova, who made the semifinals at Wimbledon last year, taking on Kristen Flipkins, who made the semifinals at Wimbledon in 2012. Now, both these players are unique in the sense that they don't rely on power at all. Expect a lot of slicing, dicing, slow play in this one, long rallies. You'd expect Rybarikova, with her greater experience now, and she's playing some solid tennis, to come through in straight sets. Nonetheless, it should be an interesting watch. Now, Timea Babos, who already mentioned, beat Coco Vandeweghe, also has an interesting opponent in the second round, Carla Suarez Navarro. Now, Carla Suarez Navarro is a veteran of the women's game. She has consistently made quarterfinals and round of 16s at many Grand Slams. So if Babos was celebrating her win against Vandeweghe, she's got to be focused again because Carla Suarez Navarro is a tricky opponent. Lovely single-handed backhand, great net play as well. In fact, Babos is also a very good player at net, so expect lots of good exchanges in this game too. I think I'm going to go for Carla Suarez Navarro to win in 3 sets against Timea Babos. Now, two other players who caused upsets. Kai Kanepi beat 24th seed former Australian Open finalist Dominika Cibulkova in the first round, and Monica Puig beat home favorite Samantha Stosur in the first round, and they go up against each other. Now, Monica Puig, of course, a Puerto Rican, won gold at the 2016 Olympics, and we're really waiting for her to translate that performance into a Grand Slam because she's got the game. She's a big hitter. She's a clean hitter. If she stays consistent, she can make a deep run in what is really a wide open field in the women's draw. So Monica Puig versus Kai Kanepi. You can't underestimate the veteran Kanepi. I think Kanepi will edge this out in 3. Another game that's really interesting is 12 seed Julia Georgis, who's actually on a 12-match winning run, and some consider the German a bit of a dark horse for this tournament. Is taking on Alizé Cornet. Now, Alizé Cornet in the past has beaten Maria Sharapova, Serena Williams at Grand Slams. She always has an upset in her. So this should be an interesting match, but I think the consistency of Georgis, especially with her serve, will see her through in 2 sets. And the final match I wanted to talk about is another home favorite. Lots of home hopes relying on 23rd seed Daria Gavrilova. She's playing the last match at Margaret Court Arena against Elise Mertens, who is a very, very tricky opponent. She's taken Serena and Venus to the distance in previous games. So I think this is going to be a fascinating match. Gavrilova will, of course, have the fans behind her, but Mertens is more than capable of causing a shock. I will actually sit on the fence in this one, and let's see how it transpires. So it should be an interesting day 3 at the 2018 Australian Open. Do forgive me, I have a bit of issues with my throat, so I've not been the clearest, but hopefully I've got my point across. This is Wasim Parkar signing out. I'll be back to preview day 4 of the 2018 Australian Open.